Well, good afternoon, everyone, on this cold, snowy April the 3rd in Wisconsin. But we're here for a very important day to remember a hero, an activist, a father, a prophet who not only changed the dynamics of the black community, but set forth the vision that transformed the lives of the nation, of the world. And so we're here to remember the day in which a hero was taken from us, a father was taken from us, a religious leader was taken from us, in many ways a light that followed a path that many would not follow and left us a trail of justice, equality that continues to inspire us today. So we're here to remember the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and we're going to do our part here in Madison to show our commitment and our consistent dedication to ensuring that justice continues to fall and that we continue to follow the path that Dr. King set out for us. It's always good to note that we can remember Dr. King as his beloved figure in our country. But it's also a reminder that at the time Dr. King's life was taken, he wasn't a beloved figure. He was probably one of the most hated individuals in this entire country because of what he fought for, because of what he believed in, and ultimately what he gave his life for. And so because of that, I don't want us to ever lose or be caught up in the notion of just beautiful accolades, but to remember that this man, against all odds, this very young man, chose to give his life fighting for justice, fighting for equality, and fighting for peace. And because he gave his life is a reason why we're able to stand together in a sense of solidarity and community here on the steps of the City County Building here in Madison, Wisconsin. It is my great honor to be the MC today as we begin to chart a new path and a consistent path toward equality and justice. But in doing so, I'd like to have the privilege of introducing our mayor of the city of Madison, that in the summer of 1966, the Chicago Freedom Movement held marches to draw attention to housing market inequalities. The Chicago Freedom Movement and its nonviolent campaigns against inequality are credited as the inspiration for the landmark 1968 Housing Act. The Chicago Freedom Movement members included Martin Luther King Jr., then the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and Chicago civil rights activists, including our next speaker, the City of Madison, Mayor Paul Soglin. Let's welcome him as he comes.
Thank you. I must say that at that time, I had absolutely no idea as to the importance or the consequences of what we were doing to bring open housing to the Chicago metropolitan area. I can still remember a day much, much warmer than this at the Village Green in Winnetka, Illinois, where Dr. King spoke. And then it was the following day that we went into the heart of Chicago to address Mayor Daley and the Chicago leaders about the issues of redlining, about the issues of blockbusting and housing discrimination in my hometown. I just came from East High School, and I presented this past hour a relatively short history from the end of World War II until 1968. And I'd like to borrow on a portion of that because it is cold and I have so much respect for you. I'm going to keep this very short so that we can stay warm. And that is the fact that Dr. King was always growing and learning and evolving. He never stayed in the same place. If we go back and we look at his message and his involvement, in the late 1950s, and where he was a decade later in 1968. He was on a march, not a march just from Selma to Birmingham, but on a march through time, taking on greater and greater responsibilities. And so what started out as a march to eventually see the enactment of the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, a march to deal with the fact that Rosa Parks had to sit in the back of the bus, or that Woolworths would not allow African Americans to sit at its lunch counters, and that there were even Coca-Cola machines which had drink ice-cold Coca-Cola, whites only. But he went from that to voting rights in the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And then he embraced a larger message of peace, questioning the United States' military combat around the world. And from that, he went to a larger message, which brought him that fateful day in 1968 to Memphis of economic and social justice, going far beyond what any legislation might do. And if there's one thing that I would take from his memory, it is that we are to grow and expand our thinking and our love as we embrace more and more people for the struggle to bring justice to this country and to the entire world. Dr. King and Malcolm X only met once in their entire lives. It was a very, very short exchange where they greeted one another, and Malcolm X said to Dr. King, "I am here to put my heart into the civil rights movement." And so, as Dr. King would want us to this day, not just remember his legacy, but the legacy of Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Emmett Till, Viola Liuzzo, and all the people who gave their lives and made a sacrifice on behalf of the people of this nation to bring about justice, that we can march forward today and redouble our efforts to use that vote and to use the power we've obtained. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. We appreciate those words. Our next speaker will be that of Wes Sparkman. He's representing Dane County, and he was the first officer of the Tamara Grigsby Office of Equity and Inclusion. As Mayor Soglin reminded us, it was very important for us to honor the commitment of others who have dedicated their passion. And not only has the city of Madison committed itself and dedicated itself to a long-term commitment to justice and honoring the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, so has the community of Dane County. And so representing Dane County, let's give a warm welcome to Wes Sparkman as he comes to offer his words of reflection.
Thank you. Thank you to Honorable Judge Mitchell. I want to thank the Office for Civil Rights for putting this event together and bringing us all together. Thank you to Renee Frederick. Thank you to Theola Carter and the Office for Equity and Inclusion. And I just wanted to offer an observation and a challenge. An observation and a challenge. The observation is that the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King is so real and so strong for us still today, 50 years after his death, that we're all here standing in the cold today. So let's give it up for ourselves today, this morning. And that legacy is so strong, and it exists. And I think that what I'm most struck by is the connection between commitment and faith. So Dr. King's commitment and Dr. King's faith is something that he leaves us and something that we have to continue on. So his commitment to equal opportunity, to justice, his commitment to love and to peace is something that is recognized through all of us here today. And that strength of that commitment is important. So, like many of us, Dr. King had mentors and he had teachers to challenge him and to push him along the way. So Dr. Benjamin Mays, past president of Morehouse College, he used to say to his students, and something that we can take away today, whatever you do, strive to do it so well that no man living and no man dead and no man yet to be born could do it any better. And I believe Dr. King lived up to that, and Dr. King represented that, and so can we today. So whether you work across the street, One West Wilson, as a policy analyst, or whether you work with in corrections and juveniles, or whether you're in the Office for Equal Opportunity, whether you're the chief of police, whether you work in the mayor's office as an analyst or an executive assistant, whatever we do, we should strive to do it to the best of our ability and strive to do it so well that no man living and no man dead and no man yet to be born can do it any better. And so in honor of Dr. King, let's move on in that light. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you so much. In a few minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to start our march at the front of our city county steps where we're at right now. And we're going to be led by Pastor Collier from the Zion City Church Choir and the Ford Marching Band. And they're going to help us with our march, and they're going to lead us and guide us in this march. I will tell you that the legacy of Dr. King and the marching is always a reminder that he gave us a vision that many groups and many of us have used to continue to fight for equality. You know, marching to some people is like an irritation, and they don't always understand the significance of why communities had to march. And sometimes we have to remind future generations that sometimes you march because they don't always let you into the boardrooms, and they didn't always let us at the table. And when you're not at the table, you're not allowed to be at the table in the boardroom, the place you got to take your messages to the streets. And the inconvenience to drivers and inconvenience to other people is just their inconvenience, but we will march. And we will continue to march until all of the issues of injustice continue to subside, and we truly do see a place for injustice. Because we do recognize that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And so we march for love. We march for light. We march for justice. We march for all of the people who don't have the ability to march or whose voices cannot be heard. And we march and we continue to use our feet. I love the story that Dr. King always talked about when they marched, when they were trying their best to make sure that the bus boycotts stayed efficient and made sure that people did not get tired. And he ran across an older lady who said to her, she said, "My feet is tired, but my soul is arrested." And so the idea is that sometimes we march and we may get tired. We may get cold. We may get frustrated. We may get overwhelmed. But when you marching for justice, baby, your soul is on fire for that reason. So as we get ready to march, let us keep our cold bodies moving, and let's get our souls ignited for the reasons for why we're walking, to remember the legacy, but also to point us forward to what it is that Dr. King will require us to fight for in the future. Let's go here.
Good afternoon. We're going to be sharing 3 songs, a total of 6 songs between myself and Forward Marching Band. Forward Marching Band is going to kick us off. One song that they'll be sharing is the popular Pointer Sisters, We Are Family. The songs that we'll lead together as a chorus are 3 of the more popular civil rights songs: We Shall Overcome, Oh Freedom, and People Get Ready. So those first 2 songs that we sing, I will sing those songs, lead them, but I will also lead you in the words of those songs in case you're not familiar with all of the words. All right? So at this time, we'll get ready to get started. Forward Marching Band is going to kick us off first, and then we'll proceed naturally as we march.
Good afternoon again, everyone. I'm Norm Davis. I'm the City of Madison. Can't hear me? How about that? Is that better? All right. Good afternoon again. I'm Norm Davis. I'm the City of Madison Department of Civil Rights Director, and I greet you on this day that we're commemorating the 50th anniversary of the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. At this time, I want to invite to the lectern Sheri Carter, City of Madison Alder for the 14th District, and she will read to you the honoring resolution that was approved by the Common Council commemorating this day. And we have a special treat as she concludes, as we will unveil the new street sign that will be posted here on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Alder Carter.
Thank you. Thank you. Whereas Dr. King was born on January 15, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, to the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and Alberta Williams King, and whereas Dr. King attended Morehouse College from 1944 to 1948 and was ordained in his final semester, and whereas Dr. King married Coretta Scott King on June 18, 1953, and whereas Dr. King obtained a doctorate degree in 1955 from Boston University, the same year he led a 381-day nonviolent demonstration that became known as the Montgomery Bus Boycott at the age of 26. Whereas Dr. King combined Mohandas Gandhi's precepts of nonviolence with Christian social and gospel ideas to expand the civil rights movement to become a national civil rights leader, and whereas Dr. King authored and delivered many well-known publications, books, and speeches, including Letter from Birmingham Jail, Beyond Vietnam, and I Have a Dream, all of which are among the most revered oration and writing in the English language. And whereas Dr. King was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization at the forefront of the civil rights movement, rooted in nonviolence, direct action. And whereas in 1963, Dr. King orchestrated the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom event with over 250,000 attendings in Washington, D.C., and delivered one of the most quoted speeches of all time. Whereas after the police attacks with tear gas and clubs on demonstrators, Dr. King waited federal court approval to carry out the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge on the Selma to Montgomery March. And whereas in addition to many other achievements, Dr. King was named Man of the Year by Time magazine in 1963 and awarded the Peace Prize in December 1964. Whereas in one of his last activism campaigns, Dr. King led thousands of sanitation workers and demonstrators on a march through downtown Memphis. And whereas Dr. King's life was cut tragically short when he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, yet his legacy remains strong. And whereas Dr. King is considered the most influential spokesperson of the early 60s, helped achieve more progress towards racial equality in his 13 years of activism than in the previous 3 centuries, and is one of the greatest leaders and advocates of nonviolence in history. And whereas Dr. King's life was dedicated to racial equality in America, advocating through nonviolence leadership, and whereas we still face the choice of either nonviolence or non-existence, and whereas we must stand together to fight intolerance and cowardice, and exclusively justice and kindness, and now there be it resolved that the mayor and the common council of the city of Madison commend and honor the life and valor of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the 50th anniversary of his death. Thank you.
And now we will have the unveiling of the new street sign. Alder Carter. This sign will be posted where you see the lift over at the intersection of Doty and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Thank you. Yep. I want to say thank you so much to all of you that came out today and everyone that made this event possible. We have some special speakers that are coming up in a moment, but I wanted to have a few remarks, a few words before they come. And we're a little bit ahead of schedule, so we expect to be able to honor the fact that you've stood out here in the cold for so long and be able to let you go early. But I wanted to acknowledge Mayor Paul Soglin, County Executive Joe Parisi, Wes Sparkman, the director of the Tamara D. Grigsby Office for Equity and Inclusion, City of Madison Alders, the Department of Civil Rights staff. Can we give a hand to the Department of Civil Rights staff and all of their hard work in helping to make this event possible? Our city colleagues, including our partner agencies, our departments that help us to create the sign, and our commissions that do a lot of hard work in supporting the Department of Civil Rights. Our civil rights colleagues and our community partners, our community supporters, including the media. I want to say thank you to so many members of the media for being here. And I want to say a special thanks to our predecessors. It was mentioned already earlier today about those that have gone before us. But there have been so many who served their generation by shouldering the struggle for us right here in Madison and throughout our country. We honor the countless sacrifices of life and liberty that paved the way so that you and I can continue the fight for freedom, opening doors of opportunity for generations to come. Because we cannot do this work alone. Let me say that again. We cannot do this work alone. It takes all of us. We cannot go back, and we cannot back down. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today as we commemorate. It's so important that we commemorate the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as one of our most treasured national and international heroes. It's important to take stock of the past 50 years and to propel civil rights forward for the next 50 years, beyond the challenges that we face today. As Dr. King said, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. So this is why we do what we do. We must care for each other. Our department helps to represent and to amplify the silent and invisible in our community. Each community member is entitled to know their rights and to expect equal treatment under the law. We vigorously pursue the tenets of civil rights and work hard to ensure that our city is a community of people who respect the rights and the contributions of every community member. I encourage you to join us in getting involved. Yesterday was election day. I'm curious to know how many know who their city alder is. How many know who their county board supervisor is? A few less hands. I encourage you to get involved, contacting your representatives, not necessarily to complain. You can compliment them for a job well done, but getting to know them and letting them know that you vote. These are the rights for which Dr. King and so many others fought. I encourage you to join us by getting involved. Our department was involved recently in fighting legislation at the state level that would have deeply cut the civil rights protections for the city of Madison. And I'm glad to report that those prohibitions, those cuts have not gone into effect and will not go into effect this legislative session.
This gentleman is too modest. He is the principal person who went before the legislature, and what we thought were going to be an awful moment persuaded them not to go down that dark path and to undo all the work we've made in this city since Reverend Wright helped to found and become the predecessor as the director of the Equal Opportunities Commission.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. We're all in this together, and it takes all of us. I want you to know that city government is here for you, and we take your needs seriously. We've partnered with many of the community-based organizations to provide a way for individuals in the community to learn their rights. And when they experience discrimination, they don't have to come down to the city-county building, but they can confide in someone in their community that they trust through our Certified Community Partners program. We work with the university in developing the Upstart program for women and people of color to develop businesses and develop ideas free of cost for 10 weeks. And one of the model programs for business development. We work together with our community partners to develop jobs and careers through the Construction Employment Initiative, through our Aspire internship program for those engaged in college-level studies, and through the mayor's own Wanda Fulmore program for those students in high school so that they can connect with city government. We've recently launched our language access program so that everyone can have meaningful access to City of Madison services. And we shine the light on hate crimes and incidents of hate through Seeking Tolerance and Justice Over Hate, Stage O. So I want to thank you for joining us today. Let us continue fighting against discrimination and harassment and fight for diversity, inclusion, and equity. True greatness is not limited to the stories told by history or even his story, but by what we each do in following Dr. King's example to shape the future. Thank you. At this time, I want to call up our next speaker. And I'll give her a brief introduction and allow her to elaborate more. Laura Minero is a Ph.D. student in counseling psychology at UW-Madison, and she is the 2017 recipient of the Alex Olson Award for the promotion of a tolerant and just community. At this time, prepare for a treat. We bring to you Laura Minero.
Thank you for being here on such a lovely day, right? We're all freezing a little bit. I'm really honored to be here. I know there's so many people that could have been asked to come speak on such an important day. And so I'm just very honored and humbled. And I continue to say this about the Madison community. I'm a transplant from California. And so I just continue to thank the Madison community for your continued support in my own vision, which is a vision of community, which is a vision of love, which is a vision of moving forward. And so I just thank all of you for having me here today and continuing to support that. So I don't know, I think they spoke me up a little bit too much, so I'll try to fulfill maybe 25% of that. But MLK's 50th anniversary of his assassination reminds us that there are always those whom push back and will try to shut the progress down. But as we learned from the legacy he left behind, there is always more equity we can push for, more to aspire to, and more to dream of. I could not know dreams more intimately than the dreams of my Mexican undocumented parents, those they instilled in me as an immigrant to the United States. So I came here at the age of 5, and I myself am undocumented. And for me, my parents also had a dream. My parents had a dream that I would have a better future. They had a dream that I would make something of myself. And I don't think that they knew how much that would contribute and give back to society. But I think I've been in a privileged space to be able to do that. And again, I say that here in the Madison community in particular. And I talk about dreams. We know the famous speech, but also that many parts of his important speech were cut out of history books, right? That talks about the injustices in many different sectors, in many different systems that we need to pay attention to. And I think I know those intimately as a queer and documented brown woman myself, but also through the clients that I treat at Journey Mental Health Center as an intern, who often get caught up in the legal system and have implications, not just for themselves, but for their families. And those people have dreams, right? So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is how important it is for us to connect with one another and remember that we all have hopes and dreams. And I'm sure this has been said often across history and across time, but there truly could not be a more critical and important time than seeking reform and justice than now, but not by creating further divides. It's hard to be the ones to rise above. At times it can be exhausting, and we might not uphold our own values all the time. But like Dr. MLK said himself, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And the reason why that resonates with me so much is that we are living in a time, right, where people are starting to be more blatant about their attitudes once again. We saw that in history. Then I think we went through a period where there was more this implicit bias. People were more aversive about their racism. But we're in a time where we're seeing those divides fully in front of us, right? And I think that what works best for us is to challenge ourselves to try to figure out where the pain is for people, where the hurt is. Why are we being led to create these divisions? Why are we pointing fingers at one another instead of coming together and figuring out how do we restructure the structures that are actually the ones that create these systems of privilege and oppression? And that's why I feel that the words of Dr. MLK are still so relevant today, because we're not going to get there by further perpetuating hate. We're only going to get there by finding the love that exists within us and rising above, meeting people there, going to have those difficult conversations. And I'll give one example of just a couple of weeks ago of how this might come into play. And it's difficult, it's challenging, it's exhausting, but I'll give this brief example. So I was at the Capitol in DC doing some advocacy work for Medicare and Medi-Cal with the American Psychological Association. And I went with my Wisconsin State Psychological Association, and it was the first time I was meeting them. And the APA said, for the first time ever, we're going to let you advocate on whatever issues you want to advocate on, in addition to these two that we're here to do, right? So I've done a lot of work with DACA and advocating for DREAM Act, advocating for immigrant justice reform, and I was like, can we advocate for that? You know, I have a lot of experience in that. And one of the women was straight up like, no, I don't know that we can do that. And I was like, well, we're in psychology. This is a human justice issue. You know, this is a civil rights issue. I don't understand why we can't talk about this. And they were like, well, I'll just let you know now I'm really conservative. And so I was like, well, what does that mean? You know, and initially I definitely was drawn back. I definitely pulled back, and I was like, I don't know that I want to go with these women and with this person in particular to the, you know, United States Capitol and advocate alongside this person who says they won't advocate for me and the 800,000 other undocumented immigrants that are impacted by this legislation, right? But I thought to myself, okay, like, has she ever met someone who's undocumented? Like, what's the situation here? And I said, you know what? Well, I do take offense to what you're saying because I'm undocumented. And her eyes turned big, and she was like, well, I've never met someone who's undocumented before. And I was like, yeah, you know, like this issue is really pertinent to me. And this actually led to us having dinner together, and she was like, I want to know about your story. I don't know anyone that's been in this situation. And I literally did sit there over dinner for 2 hours and shared, you know, like, this has been my experience. And she was like, well, people who are undocumented don't pay taxes. I was like, that's not true. So I had to, like, it was challenging because I felt like I had to fight for my existence. And I'm not saying that that's our role and that should be our role all the time, but that's what I mean when I say sometimes we have to rise above it. Sometimes we have to meet people where they are at because they truly just have not had those experiences, right? And at the end of it, at the end of our conversation, she did end up saying, you know what? You truly did change my mind. She's like, I had no idea because I'd never talked to anyone in your experience before, and all I'd been exposed to was what I learned from my family, what I learned from the media, right? Media plays a critical role in these stereotypes that we create about one another. And she went around the rest of the conference telling people about our engagement and how that was corrective for her. And I was able to advocate for DACA when we went to the Capitol and when we went to the Hill. But had I given up, thank you. But had I given up, had I said, you know, had I gone to the hate, to the hurt that I had and turned that into hate and said, I'm not going to stand alongside you, I would have just recapitulated the very same pattern that keeps our communities apart, that keeps us in the same kind of cycle that we've been in, right? And I recognize that people still need to recognize their privilege. We still need to deconstruct the systems that are creating this oppression. But we as individuals need to come together and dig deep within our hearts and figure out, how do I not do what the other is doing, and how do I join them? How do I not further perpetuate this otherness? So we do this by building compassion for the other side, because at the end of the day, we are more alike than we are different. Engage in dialogue, take action, and remember that we truly all want the same things. We all want love, and we all want to be accepted. I have another thing to say. So Dr. MLK was big on allyship, right? And that's why this is so important. So one of the quotes that he also shared with us was, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." So part of that work is also, when you see an injustice happening, you need to stand up, you need to say something, but in a way, once again, that isn't shaming of other people. Think about how you can make that a learning experience, an experience where you can join with someone and give someone a different experience, right? Sometimes people just do not have it in their awareness because they've never had that experience, because they've never had to think about their identities in that way. And most of the time, that's to no fault of their own. Another very brief example that I'll give about that, I went at the same conference. It was a predominantly white space. They were talking about how do you engage in advocacy as a psychologist. And there were 2 black women on the panel, which was rare because it was a predominantly white conference. And so I think they had some really amazing knowledge to share. And very unfortunately, at the end of that session, 2 white men came to the podium when it was time to ask questions, and they didn't ask any questions. They just reiterated the same points that the black women had just made. And that was really upsetting to me. That was incredibly upsetting to me because I don't think they realized the ways in which they were taking up space, and they were not recognizing their male privilege in that specific instance. And so I actually brought this up at the town hall with a team of people and said that this needs to stop and people need to recognize what's going on. But I had a white male come up to me who had actually been sitting next to me in that session, and he's like, "You know what, I was with you in that session. Did something happen there that I missed? Like, maybe I missed something." So I explained to him, I said, "Hey, this is what I saw going on. You know, I just shared with you all what I just shared." And he was like, "Huh." He's like, "I noticed that too, but I just thought they were being, they were just wanting to, I don't know what they were doing. They were self-promoting." That's the word he said. "I thought they were just being self-promoting." I was like, well, we don't know what they were doing, but the way that that comes off in that space, when you have 2 black women on that panel, that's where we need to change things. And he's like, "Because I'm a white male," he's like, "I'm getting this." He's like, "I'm totally getting this right now. I'd never thought about this. So because I'm a white male, I didn't realize how that was taking up space. And those folks were re-explaining what black women had just said." And I was like, "Exactly." He's like, "Thank you." He's like, "What can I do?" I was like, "You're doing it right now. You came and asked. You're learning. You're trying to figure out how you can do things differently." And so that's just another example of something small that we can all do in our day-to-day. I could have not engaged in that conversation again with him, right, and said, "This is for you to figure out. You need to go figure that out on your own." But I didn't, and we had a great conversation, and it was a great thing for him to think about moving forward, right? So I'll leave you all with this, because I think that this is one of my favorite quotes by Dr. MLK, and thank you for listening today and sparing the cold with everyone. So just like MLK, I have decided to stick with love, for hate is too great of a burden to bear. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. At this time, I want to invite the mayor for a brief presentation. I know you all have been observing this beautiful artwork that we have on the podium. And we'll have the mayor to present to the artist, Adam C. Carter. We invite you to come up at this time, come to the podium. And we want to thank him for his beautiful artwork and the contribution that he's made to this day, to this event, by crafting this beautiful picture of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
Thank you very much.
Say hello, rest of it with me there.
Thank you so much. At this time, we want to bring Jaleah Hunt to the lectern. All right. Jaleah Hunt is a student at Capitol High School. Sheri, all right. But before that, we'll have Alder Sheri Carter come up with some brief remarks.
Thank you very much. I can tell you that my great-great-grandmother was never able to vote. And my great-grandmother was not able to vote. But my grandmother, who never thought she was going to vote, lived long enough to cast her vote. And she died at 98, and that was still the most memorable memory for her, was being able to walk up to City Hall in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and cast that vote. That's how important it is for us to lead the way, to be engaged, because we don't know the number of people that had to make this happen for not only us, but future generations. Those forerunners didn't know it was going to happen. They believed it was going to happen, and they wanted it to happen. But when it became reality, it became their battle cry. And I asked each of you to carry on that battle cry, to keep working towards equality, keep working for jobs, keep working for decent pay, keep working. Our job is never going to be done. When I hear someone say, have we achieved everything? As long as we live, as long as there's a next generation, the work continues, the dream is there, and we will achieve something great if we work together. Thank you.
And Sheri, if your grandmother lived long enough, the new mayor of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is an African-American woman. And that's just the beginning.
That's just the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Carter. And now, Jaleah Hunt is a student at Capitol High School and a winner of the 2018 Delta Sigma Theta Creative Writing Award. So we're in for another treat, but she wanted me to let you know that this is her first time publicly speaking. So she's in good hands, isn't she? She has a great crowd, right? A lot of love and support. So, Jaleah Hunt.
This is my speech that I wrote, and I wanted to share it with everybody. So, okay. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was an inspirational, motivational, and passionate man. He advocated justice in the face of inequality and showed compassion when confronted with hatred. He dedicated his life to nonviolence in an often brutal world. King's message of peace for all humanity, regardless of our differences, is as important today as it was during the era of civil rights marches. His dream of living in a nation where people are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, has not yet been realized, although 50 years have passed since his death. Dr. Martin Luther King has also drastically changed the world. To me, his dream meant equality and justice for all his people. He wanted everyone to come together in unity, both white and black, regardless of past actions or mistakes. He looked at a person's character, personality, and actions. As a young black female, I am confronted daily with the racism and inequality King marched against. I do not allow these ugly stereotypes to define who I am as a person in this world. King's message of compassion, to love those who have wronged us, give me the strength and hope every day when I wake up. I thank the Lord for allowing me to see another day. Then, when I look at the poster on my wall, it reminds me that I am not defined by other people's actions, but motivates me to represent my family through positive actions. The news of another black man being shot by a police officer is an example of where we must show compassion in the face of hatred. This does not mean that we are powerless. It is an opportunity to stand together as humans and confront the system that has allowed violent crimes to be committed based on the color of one's skin. In King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech, he says, "We cannot walk alone, and as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back." There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will we be satisfied? This question is still being asked today, and the answer is still the same. We will never be satisfied until all people are free from violence at the hands of the powerful. It is why we march today, and it is why we will march again, until we are truly free from hatred and oppression. King spoke not only of justice and compassion, but also of nonviolence. Like Dr. King, we want justice for those who have lost their lives to senseless acts of violence. We want justice for the young lives that were taken from us, and we want justice for the victims of the school shooting in Florida. In the wake of Florida's school shooting, our generation followed in King's footsteps by using nonviolent direct action to confront a system in need of change. Students across the country organized nonviolent mass walkouts and marches, many becoming politically active for the first time in their lives. Instead of fighting violence with violence, we fought with our voices to achieve our goal of justice, just like King did. King said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." The beauty of nonviolence is that in its own way and in its own time, it seeks to break the chain reaction of evil. Dr. Martin Luther King never had hate in his heart, only forgiveness and love for all people. Luke 6:37 says, Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn others, or it will all come back against you. Forgive others, and you will be forgiven. In the face of evil, forgiveness and love are our strongest weapons. We must forgive those who have wronged us. We must forgive the man who shot Martin Luther King Jr. We must forgive those who kill others because of fear and hate. We must honor King's death by being living examples of his message of love. 50 years after King's death, we must come forward and take on the role of civil rights activists. We must be the change we want for the next generation. We must use this opportunity to confront the evils of racism, inequalities, and violence. It is time to rise up and stand up to racial injustice, to speak up and tell everyone that we are not taking no for an answer. It is time to use love as a weapon against hate and peace as a weapon against violence. Together, we can create the world King dreamed of. Thank you.
Outstanding, outstanding. Well, Jaleah's speech brings us to the conclusion of this event. I want to thank again each of you for joining us for this commemoration and rededication on this 50th anniversary of the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.